I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast, monthly roundtable podcast where the brothers behind threebrothersfilm.com have substantial, nuanced conversations about film. I'm your host this month, Anders Bergstrom, and I'm here with one of my brothers,
Aren.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And we're talking about Steven Spielberg's autobiographical coming-of-age film, The Fabelmans. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast and reading the website. Ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify are always appreciated. So if you haven't left us one, please consider pausing and doing that right now. Also, if you're one of those people who likes to use YouTube to discover things to listen to, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find full episodes and clips, and, as part of our James Cameron retrospective, Aren's video essay introduction to the Canadian director. And with that, on with the show.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Movies are dreams that you never forget. Sammy?
The lights change how everything looks. It's hard to find our house.
Ours is the dark house with no lights.
In this family, it's the scientists versus the artists. Sammy's on my team, takes after me.
In the age of intellectual property and franchises, Steven Spielberg remains one of the few popular directors whose films are an event just based on his name. In the case of The Fabelmans, the film has the additional interest in turning the camera on himself, in a way. The Fabelmans is a thinly veiled autobiographical look at Spielberg's own childhood and teenage years, and the difficult relationship between his mother and father, and his discovery of cinema as a form of personal expression. But in an age of superhero films, this isn't just Spielberg, the origin story. The Fabelmans is a lovely and moving account of a boy in a family torn between art and science. The Spielberg stand-in is Sammy Fabelman, played for the bulk of the film during his teenage years by Gabriel Labelle, and by Matteo Zorian as a small boy. Sammy's family are Jewish, which causes Sammy to be singled out at high school and make them feel sometimes alone in the world. His father, Bert, played by Paul Dano, is a computer engineer, working for RCA, then GE, and finally IBM, taking the family and his best friend, Uncle Benny, played by Seth Rogen, along with him, as his job takes him from New Jersey to Arizona and finally to California. And this causes some stress for Sammy and his three sisters, as well as their mother, Mitzi Fabelman, played by Michelle Williams. Mitzi is a concert-level pianist, and while Bert is in many ways a supportive husband, Mitzi finds herself unhappy and unwell, impacting Sammy's life in ways that he could not have imagined. The film begins with Sammy attending a viewing of Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth as a small boy. This is his first movie as a kid. Later at home, Sammy recreates the train crash from the film with his radio-controlled train set he gets for Hanukkah, and he films it with his father's 8mm camera. As his mother points out, this way, he only has to crash the train once, but he can revisit it over and over until the small boy can come to grips with this frightening scene in the film. From then on, Sammy is a film whiz kid, creating westerns and war movies with innovative special effects as part of his scout troop. His father admires Sammy's skill, but isn't certain that a life making movies is going to pan out. Film then not only becomes the medium by which Sammy processes his various fears and also how he discovers some deeper truths about the world, but it mediates between his mother's artistry and his father's technical prowess. Now, it'd be easy to read the film as overly schematic and sentimental, and we'll see how you think about this, Aren. But The Fabelmans has Spielberg confronting the role of cinema in the 20th century from a very personal standpoint. The film poses some really interesting questions about the ethical consequences of film, its ability to potentially reveal truth about the world otherwise not known to us, or to manipulate and shape the world as we wish to see it. It is the mark of a director moving into his elder statesman years, reflecting back not only on history, but his own life. Now, the film is filled with some excellent performances, in particular, Judd Hirsch as Sammy's sort of black sheep circus performer great uncle, to Seth Rogen as the Uncle Benny character. But it is Michelle Williams as Mitzi and Paul Dano as Bert who have to carry the heaviest roles in the film. Filling out the characters of the parents so as to leave us with rounded portraits of complex individuals. Neither is the villain, and we can see where they're coming from as they navigate marital discord. But the consequences for Sammy's life are very real nonetheless. Now, if The Fabelmans reminded me of any particular film in Spielberg's past, it's perhaps Catch Me If You Can, for its mix of period detail, humor, and the family drama at the center. But The Fabelmans obviously carries some more expectations with it, given it's meant to tell us something about the director himself. So what did you think, Aren? Where does The Fabelmans fall for you in Spielberg's recent output or in his overall oeuvre? And did you enjoy it as much as I did? Because I liked it quite a bit.
From the sounds of it, you might have liked it a little bit more than me. I thought it was very interesting, very entertaining, but I'm not like over the moon for it as a movie. It's kind of interesting because this is one of those films where I didn't like swoon for, but I could see it being very meaningful and even like genuinely impactful on my own life, in the fact that while watching it, I felt a little overwhelmed by its loving and very bold and very insistent declaration of like the importance of following your passion, especially when that passion is film. And so considering that I haven't like made a movie in 3 years, I was sitting there watching it being like, I need to go make another movie. Like it really was like, no, if I don't do what Sammy does, I'm going to be, Mitzi or something. Like you're going to be left behind and feeling that like discontent that you'll never be able to get over if you don't follow that thing. So like it taps into that deep emotional.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to start, is like the films sort of take on this romantic notion of pursuing art and craft, right? So Sammy gets the millimeter camera and he's making movies. He's, entranced by cinema from the first moment. I have to admit, I prefer the performance of Gabriel LaBelle. And Matteo Zorian, he's just a little kid. It's hard to, in some scenes. I felt like they overdo the Spielberg, face, the wonder of the big screen. Although I did appreciate that people in the 1952 would go and put on a suit and go to the theater.
I know.
Seemed like a great experience. But I appreciate that the film, it's sort of this single-minded like pursuit of film as being something meaningful as an entertainment than as a processing device. I think that's a really interesting suggestion that, and it's one that I've heard before, that from critics suggesting, for instance, that, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a film made by a young Jewish director getting revenge against the Nazis, right? I mean, Spielberg's father is a World War II vet. Many aspects of the characters are pretty apparently close to reality. But you get, and Spielberg's always kind of been a little bit of a romantic. But it's interesting because in his earlier films, you kind of get, this is a constant theme in his films where someone is, drawn one way, the whole family art thing that his great uncle introduces. I like Judd Hirsch's performance. I especially liked his introduction of like the Jewish grieving traditions. He's like, "What, you never sat Shiva? You rip your clothes and lie on the floor, right?" Yeah. And then Sam does it.
Yeah, he just rips his pocket.
Yeah, he's like, "I'll just rip my pocket a little bit." But yeah, this idea that no, you got to do it, but just be prepared for the consequences of it, right? And that's something that like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg has often said he couldn't make that movie later, as once he was a parent, a film where a guy like literally leaves his family.
But he kind of did with this movie.
But exactly, so with this film is kind of, he does make a movie again where the message appears to be on the surface firmly in his great uncle's, camp, and that obviously this is part of what...
no, it's Mitzi's line of, you don't owe your life to anyone, right?
Yeah, but that's where I'm not sure I entirely buy the film's message at all, right? Like,
no.
I'm probably at the point in my life where I'm not that much of a romantic, but I guess one thing I appreciated a lot about the film is that it does give equal... I think a lot of people will walk away from the film thinking, Mitzi's right, that's the point, because Spielberg did go off and follow. But at the same time, I think don't overlook like the impact of the father figure, the idea of pushing technical brilliance and like, innovation and things like that. And his dad is actually like, Bert's actually a really good guy.
He is.
He really and he does end up supporting, sorry, spoiler, Sam becomes goes off to Hollywood at the end, So I think actually what it is, it's a film that he wasn't going to pick sides in his parents. He was just going to allow them both to say their piece, and they each have their little speech.
And it's so clear how both of them lead into him. And so there's often this idea with filmmaking, right? That it's the art that is also the most of a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so fascinating that his dad's an engineer and his mom is a pianist. And so it's like you have the purest form of performer art and technical creation. And it's like, what is film? It's you're expressing yourself artistically by technically creating something.
Yeah.
So it's just, it works too perfectly. It's a film that like explains Spielberg so much, but I don't think we should value it so much from that lens, because I think we can understand Spielberg from his other movies. It's, art always reflects the artist in the most accidental or purposeful ways. And it's not something that like you need to have an explicit autobiographical or autofictional exploration to actually dig into.
So what I'm interested in about the film more than what it says, is this director who's now, what Spielberg's in his early 70s, thinking back on his life now. He's entering, like I said, that elder statesman period. He is kind of looked up to by a lot of people, but also like he's thinking back and looking and reflecting. And cinema, as it did from the very beginning, gives him this tool to do that. I think, what did you think of the way that the film portrays the different abilities of cinema? Like it is kind of a cinema class in some ways. So first it tells you that cinema allows you to play things over again, right? Process and repeat, right? And this is like why
you control time.
Exactly. So that's one lesson. And there's another lesson about the ability to remove things and delete things, right? Then there's the fact that film, this is a very Andre Bazin kind of thing for anyone who's like a big film, like in its capturing of reality actually allows you to see the world more deeply than you would have otherwise, right? Because he can go back and look at those scenes and he sees.
Yeah. So for the audience, what we're talking about here is
there's a bit of a spoiler here, but
no, but yeah. So at this point, you should have seen the movie if you're continuing to listen. But it's when he's making a camping video for his mom. His grandma has just died. And his dad's like,
and
you have
just
to make
moved to
this
Phoenix,
movie.
And they're feeling a bit depressed. Yeah,
you have to make this movie. You have to make this movie. She loved the camping trip, so you have to make and edit the film before you do anything else, so that you can show it to your mom to cheer her up. And in editing this, he starts to notice these little clips in the background of his mom and his, so-called uncle, like his dad's best friend, Benny.
Dad's best friend.
Yeah, Benny, the Seth Rogen character, and how they look at each other and how they touch each other, and the clear affection, even if there's not an actual affair happening, there's clearly an emotional one occurring in front of his eyes, and he, as a teenager, just dawns on him while going through this footage.
Honestly, that scene,
it's like a crime scene.
it's almost like the visual version of, it's like Blowout with like John Travolta, the De Palma film, right?
Well, I was thinking of Blow Up, the Antonioni.
Yeah.
No, like that is. Have you seen?
I haven't seen Blow Up
because in Blow Up it is just
one of the few. It's one of the Antonioni
and in on the dead body in the background. He's literally blowing up the footage to get the shot of the background of the murder occurring, and it's that the fact that the process, the technical process, the physical process of filmmaking allows you to have an emotional breakthrough, and now to reflect on reality with a greater like understanding and truth. So like that moment, brilliant.
I want you to make a camping trip movie. You can learn how the editing machine works while you do this. It'll make your mom feel better.
Yeah.
That last night when she danced in the headlights, that'd be great. Get to it tomorrow, okay?
Tomorrow's when we start shooting. Escape to nowhere. We're shooting all weekend.
Shooting
Dad.
next weekend.
We got like 40 guys coming to be in the movie. I'll work on all the camping trip stuff on Monday.
I'm asking you to do this now for your mom.
Yeah, and I said that I will, just not tomorrow.
Don't be selfish. She just lost her mother. That's more important than your hobby.
Dad, can you stop calling it a hobby?
It'll cheer her up, watching this. It's something we can
Her
do.
mom just died. How is that going to cheer her up?
Because you made it for her.
Yeah. And then the lesson he learns is when he makes the beach movie
Skip
for the
Day.
school and for school, Skip Day, which is like a total 60s, like,
So good.
beach movie. And the I forget the name of I should have
The
this
jock
up.
character.
The jock character who's been tormenting him and is portrayed in the film as the hero of the day, of the school, the sort of, this blonde, like, sort of like beach god, right?
Yeah.
And he's angry and he's upset. He's like, that's not how the reality is. Why did you do that? He's like, and it's like, because that's the better story.
Yeah, it's like, maybe I did it to make you feel bad. Maybe I did it because I want you to apologize to me. Maybe I did it because it makes my movie better.
Exactly. And it's like, but also the ability of cinema to misrepresent, to create a myth, to, in that way. So it is really, I those are the moments I liked those.
But you also forgot the one other moment, which is the moment where he makes the film of coming into the new house they never live in.
Yeah.
Which is the idea of he's portraying what could be and not what is.
The possibilities of the future, in a way.
Exactly.
Which are all things that Spielberg would do in his movies, yeah.
So, like, this is one of those movies, kind of similar to what I said a few minutes ago, where there are aspects of it I found profound to a degree that is, like, alarming and very, like, I want to wrestle with it on a very deep level. And because I think all the filmmaking stuff is so perceptive. The fact that it, like, digs into the process of filmmaking, it pays so much loving attention to the technical and the procedural. The fact that even just putting the film into the reel, the taping, the fact that he's using the old, I don't know the name of the editing.
Yeah, there's a name of the machine, but for 8mm,
like Vitriola or whatever, but like cutting them together. But even, like, it's to make his little movie magic. He's poking the pinholes
for the
gunshots. And the scene that I loved is the dawning realization of, like, directing an actor. So when he's making that, when he's making the war movie,
guy and his scout,
exactly,
like,
he's got the scout buddy, and he's like, "Oh, we're doing real acting here." He's like, "Yeah, you're coming over this edge, and
you all sent all those men to their death."
Yeah, he's like, "No, I didn't kill them." It's like, "No, but they're dead because you couldn't save them. You're their leader. You ordered them into this." And
then the guy's
talking,
so
and he's starting to say it, and he's starting to get emotional. And then the actor's like, "Oh, this is heavy stuff," and it's just. And then he goes and acts so well.
What, like 15-year-old kids?
Yeah, and he forgets his mark. He just keeps walking because he's so into it.
How long are you going to let him walk, right?
The movie's really funny.
The thing about this movie is that, that's partly why I thought
like, that scene's so true. That's so...
Yes.
That is like, literally I think every person who's directed has this breakthrough when they realize that, like, oh, when you're talking to an actor, you can, like, break through to something real while discussing the actor. And he's depicting the first moment that happens for him, where it's not just a fun thing on film. It's like, no, it's real emotion.
Yeah, they're just doing a Nathan Fielder style rehearsal of the real emotions that we're going to feel. So, like, that, I think that's what I thought, but why I think this movie, my initial impression is how good it is because there's already these moments in the film where I'm like, well, that's a scene I'll remember for, like, a long, long time. They stand out so. And maybe Spielberg, that happens a lot for him. I hate the whole, like, oh, Spielberg, he's, it's a return to form. I'm like, he literally made West Side Story last year, which was like,
there's never a bad period of his career.
No, I mean, like, I didn't love The Post, but, like, other than that, like, I think he's even, like, Bridge of Spies and even Ready Player One has its charms,
Hey, BFG, it's very enjoyable too.
Exactly. So, like, but this one does stand out a little bit in terms of some of those, like, individual scenes I think are quite memorable. So I'm curious what didn't ring true for you.
Yeah, so I think it's a movie where there's, like, so much in it that's clearly him, like, ripping from his heart almost in a sense. It's so personal. The movie is so personal, and I think that leads into some of the things that don't quite work for me, which is the presentation of a couple of the women in the movie. I went into it, and it's interesting, where I saw the, obviously beforehand, I saw the casting. I didn't really watch the trailer. Even when it was playing in the theater, I, like, went to the washroom. I didn't want to see it. I'm like, I don't want anything, like, seen. I'm just going to go in blind. That's kind of how I prefer for most movies now. And I was like, oh, Michelle Williams, Paul Dano. Michelle Williams, that's, like, good casting. Like, she's such a sturdy actor. And then Paul Dano, I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting because Paul Dano is a very hit or miss guy in the sense that I think he's like incredible in some movies, like Love and Mercy, or controversially, I think even for a movie that most people think is amazing, like There Will Be Blood. He's amazing in that movie, I think.
Absolutely.
But he's infuriating in that movie.
I found it interesting. If you talk about actors moving into different periods, Dano has been kind of toying with playing older characters for a while. I mean, I think he's about my age, around 40. But this is the first one where I'm like, oh, he's in. I totally buy him as like a 40-year-old man. Like,
no, but so what I was going to say is that I was expecting to be skeptical of Dano and completely on board with Michelle Williams, and my experience is the opposite. I thought Paul Dano actually is extremely credible as the somewhat emotionally reticent but extremely interested dad who, has his baggage, but he doesn't put it on his kids. He clearly is interested in his own things, and everybody would be helped if he was able to express himself a little bit better. But there's still like no doubt about his love of his family. And, it might be a connection to the fact that like our dad is an engineer who is known for being a little under expressive in certain aspects. And it's like, oh, he reminds me of Dad. And
Dad's gonna love this movie.
Oh, absolutely, because it's also going to bring him back to his childhood.
Exactly.
He's roughly the same age
as Spielberg.
Yeah. But Williams is it's such a tricky thing when you approach a character who is in this sense,
melodramatic person.
A melodramatic person, a troubled person. She's depressed. She's got mental health issues. She is, besought with other things in life that are not her life in front of her. Whether, she wants to be a pianist, but she's got all these kids. She wants to be with Benny, as we learn, but she's married to Bert. But I think it's one of those things of the personal aspect of the film. I can't assume here. Like I don't know here, but I have to kind of assume in the process of making a movie this personal that Spielberg's like, no, you represent my mother or my thoughts, my mother. But the way it comes across to me is phony because she becomes more of a totem of the disaffected Eisenhower Kennedy era housewife. She becomes a version of the artist who could not have lived out her life. The idea of the woman being flighty and not really there for her family. She buys a monkey. She doesn't unpack the thing. She's no longer cooking. And it's like, oh, she's doing things that are kind of extravagant and a little bit inappropriate in front of the kids, like dancing in her see-through nightgown. And there's a beauty there, but the character becomes more of a totem than a person. Yeah. And I think that might be it might be a reflection of his complicated relationship to his own mom and how he sees her in his life. But it's just like some of the things she says, whether it's the line, you don't owe anyone your life, where it's like, that's a self-justification. She's trying to justify the fact that she doesn't want to actually be there for the family. She's not talking to him. She's talking to herself.
Although, one aspect where she's wrong, literally, is that your kids, you did bring them into the world. You do actually owe them.
That's my whole thing. I'm like, if you have a kid, you actually, that's the lie.
That's not true anymore.
You do owe that person everything. Exactly. That's the whole point of it. I'm always hesitant to criticize an actor for their approach to a character, but I just don't think the way that Michelle Williams played the kind of tics really worked for me.
I think she played it too arch and not as grounded as everybody else did, or as like everyone else. Not that they were grounded. Like her performance doesn't quite match the rest of them. I agree.
Hers is theatrical, and the rest of them are kind of just conventional movie performances. And I think that what's his name? The guy who plays Sammy, the main
Gabriel LaBelle.
Yeah, Gabriel LaBelle. He's really good.
He is very good,
and he's great in the two senses. He's great as this kind of eyes of the audience. He's so good as that just kind of quiet watcher. But the scenes where he has to vocalize or express himself or make jokes, they all land really well and really authentic.
It's quite funny.
And so it's interesting having that balance where you're like, it's just weird to, Michelle Williams seems phony in the movie to me. And I don't know whether that's her fault.
Intentional or not, yeah.
Exactly. It's like, is the mom just playing out this dream in her life?
I think it kind of is intentional because of the nature of the character. I guess that's how I read it. I do sense what you're saying. I like it's not one of those situations where I get what you're saying. I think I just read it as more not only intentional on the part of the director, but intentional on the part of the character and the way the character is expressing herself. But I did really like, I remember the name Uncle Boris. Uncle Boris.
That's such a good scene.
Judd
where
Hirsch. It's one of those, like, for anyone who's expecting a lot of Judd Hirsch in this movie, who I really like as an actor. No, it's a one sequence.
He still might get an Oscar nom for it, honestly.
He might, yeah. The other character who, if you want to talk about the humor in the movie, oh my goodness, Chloe East is Monica. The girlfriend, the overly Christian girlfriend. I was dying at some of her stuff. It was just painful.
She's really funny, but she's very funny. So Monica, I would say I actually think of similarly. Not the performance. I think the performance is quite good, but it's similar to Missy in the sense that the presentation of that aspect. So in this part of the film, Sammy goes to a new high school in Northern California. And it's a very Christian high school, as he learns. There's not many Jewish people around. And there's some anti-Semites. And there's anti-Semites who start bullying him. And then he falls in with this girl who's very Christian. And she's like, we're going to, come over to my house to pray. But she really just wants a kiss. Yeah. And it's like, oh, she's got a mural on the wall of the men she loves in her life. And there's a bunch of Jesus pictures, but there's also like Hollywood stars.
Yeah.
And then she's like,
Elvis.
And she's like, Jesus, Jesus is sexy. Like, and she's got a big heart around.
Like, isn't that sacrilegious?
No. And she's like, no, he was a man and he was a hot man. He came to life.
He was a cute Jewish boy, just like you.
Yeah.
Which is the line that killed in the theater when I saw it.
He came to us as a man, a handsome young man. He could have come as a girl, or an old man, or someone with leprosy, but...
Well, nobody knows what he really looked like.
Probably he looked like you.
Oh, because he was...
Jewish. A handsome Jewish boy.
It's very funny. And I think she kind of makes the caricature work of this, like, clueless but well-meaning
because she's not
Christian
actually as
girl.
clueless, though, in the end, as you think.
But I'm saying that plot aspect, the way that the anti-Semitism is displayed in the film is the other thing where I'm sure it's true to life. I honestly am. But it, again, rings like of this movie that's so particular and so nuanced in the way that it does the approaching the filmmaking, the way that Sammy channels his problems with his family through the way he approaches film. Then you get like a just run of the mill, just the anti-Semitism jokes. I'm sure people did that, but it just comes across as like an after school special. And I don't know if that's fair of me, but again,
I just don't know. I'm trying to imagine how you deal with that, because in other ways, like I bet they would, like, it gets pretty violent. Like
it does. There's some pretty vicious bullying of him. And the one kid is just an absolute shithead who's just...
Can't wait for him to get his comeuppance.
Yeah, he leaves a bagel and he destroys him in film. That's the thing. He makes him come out as the biggest loser ever in the actual skip day video, and just destroys him in front of the whole graduating class. So it's a pretty great comeuppance. It's just when I'm watching that, I'm like, it's another one of those things. I don't want to judge it too much, but the watching of it seems to be slightly a different emotional tenor than the rest of the film, to the point where I can't be like, this film as a whole is one of Spielberg's best. Yeah, even though there are moments in it where I'm like overwhelmed by it. I liked West Side Story more from last year.
West Side Story was my number 2 film last year. This is not going to be my number 2 film this year.
But there's a lot of good stuff going on. I love like John Williams' score is really good.
Because it's, again, Williams, who's come almost probably going to be the last scores he does.
Isn't it the last score?
If not, it is. And it's he returning to some of his jazz roots and stuff too.
Yes. The time period, he's really playing into it.
Yeah. I just love the opening, like, just remembering the credits, like all the guys he's working with again here, like Michael Kahn and Janusz Kaminski, and like it's just like all that crew.
What did you think of the way the film handles the divorce aspect of the parents? Because it is, as you kind of said earlier, it's he doesn't want to like side with one parent or the other, even though narratively he does.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? Bert's the last parent we see,
because Liv goes to live with Bert when he goes to university.
Yeah,
and because Bert finally encourages him to go to the,
he's like, stop going to school, go do your dream,
go do your movie thing. Yeah, it kind of, I think one of the better scenes where it deals with it is actually when Julia Butters as his sister Reggie comes and they have that conversation about the parents. I think that is a very like real, and I think the reactions of the kids seem very realistic from what I understand and can imagine it would be for kids. I think it's a weird thing, because if Sam/Steven was the age he is in the film when his parents separated, it probably maybe had less of an impact on him than it might have on his younger siblings.
Oh, for sure.
Because so in that sense, he can because he got his intact childhood, he can forgive them because he was already enough of an adult to understand the impulses a little bit that were driving them one way or the other, right? He had already at that, he's, at the prom, proposing to Monica and doing,
That's so funny.
So yeah, I see what you mean, but ultimately because it's so focused in the end on Sam's perspective, I don't think you get a full treatment of that. And you could imagine a different movie, maybe from the point of view of one of the younger sisters or something, where this
or one of the parents,
or one of the parents, because because Bert's so emotionally reserved, it's hard to know, but he's clearly like kind of devastated by this.
Yeah,
and feels doubly betrayed because it's his like best friend too, right? Like, but he also understands. Because he's like he does want her to be happy.
No, but also what is the other implication with Bert? What makes Bert a very interesting character is that the most important thing in his life is the work. Yeah. It's the fact that he can create these computers for IBM. And as he says at one point where he's like, Benny was, and then he pauses, is my best friend. Yeah. But I don't need him anymore. And what he means is like, I don't need him in the work. But it also means that I don't need him personally because the work is my life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the kind of mindset that passes on to Sammy, where the work is the life. Yeah. Which again, it's like it's interesting how this movie fits into a lot of other nostalgia pieces this year, and I think this is one of those years that we've gotten several love letters to the movies. I haven't seen some of the others. I haven't seen Empire Light yet by Sam Mendes. I haven't seen Babylon by Damien Chazelle. So I don't know what kind of tenor those are taking, but I can compare this movie to some of the nostalgia pieces that are autofiction by these filmmakers.
Armageddon Time.
Yeah. Armageddon Time by James
also
Gray.
Jewish family.
Yep. Which this movie is very similar to me. I find very similar. It has nothing to do with filmmaking, Armageddon Time, but it's also that trepidation over the things that make you the person you are now and the regrets of how the very thing that makes you the person you are now is also born out of something that you kind of wish you could go back and change about your family circumstances or whatnot. You get Charlotte Wells' After Sun, which is one of the best reviewed movies of the year. And it's her Scottish filmmaker, her feature debut. And it's about like a Turkish holiday between this dad and his dad who's too young basically to be a dad. He's like turning 30 in the movie, and he's got like a 13-year-old daughter, and they're on vacation together. He's clearly not with the mom, and he's depressed, but she's not old enough to really like understand that. And so it's about coming to the realization of like, oh, your parent is like a person beyond you. And it's all about that. And so again, melancholy. And then you get even stuff in like the spring, some of these movies that fell back, and then you get, something like Apollo 10.5, which is Richard Linklater's childhood, which is much livelier, but it revels in the details.
Yeah, and it also is another where the father is like working in engineering and stuff.
Yeah, working at NASA, but a kind of not a glamorous job at NASA. But it's just interesting. We've gotten so many of these movies this year from these major directors, and one new director, but who's now making a name for herself. And it's interesting to read this film within that and be like, if this movie had come out 4 years ago, I kind of feel like the expectation would have been, oh, it's just this love letter to movies. It's this uncomplicated nostalgic piece, and it's not.
No,
it's nostalgia, but in like the true sense of being really mournful.
Bittersweet.
Yeah, exactly. Bittersweet, because it's showing his love of this thing that he's made his life doing, but also how that precludes him from fulfilling some of the other things that he wishes.
I wonder if some of these movies that are, treating this sort of, I don't know if you want to call it end, it's almost like the end of cinema in a way.
It really is.
Like disturbing. It's like,
as HBO Max deletes movies and and studios are like, yeah, we're just not going to do that anymore. As the theatrical window, theaters close and the theatrical window shrinks, and every movie in theaters is only a giant blockbuster. It's like, every 10 years you get an op-ed from a major film writer being, is this the end of movies? And it's like, it might be, for real.
It's kind of like, and I don't want to be like, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, obviously, but one thing I've always found interesting is thinking of like those cinema as being like particularly tied to an era, which is like it's the art form of the 20th century, right?
Yeah,
the long 20th century, in the same way that the novel was the art form of the long 19th century. And in the same way, at the very end, you get stuff like Proust writing, reflecting on the possibilities of the novel to look back on his own life and examine those kind of things in a way, I'm not saying The Fabelmans is Proust, but it is as much as Spielberg in his popular mode of filmmaking that people, I think actually the thing that maybe kind of bugs me the most is that like this movie, like I saw it in our city at our local like art house cinema. And I know it's playing on a few multiplexes simply because it's Spielberg, but like I feel like if this had come out, I don't know, not that it maybe could have given the subject matter like 10, 15 years ago, this would have been a much bigger movie.
Yeah.
In
it would have
terms
been
of
a
like
Catch Me If You Can style hit.
Exactly. It might have made,
$100 million.
$100 million. Exactly. And now this is like, you got guys like Spielberg and Scorsese who are like making the art house, and that means that like the art house doesn't even have room for other people. But so it's bittersweet in that way.
It is, and it's also weird because this I don't quite understand why the movie wasn't released in December, because it's like it starts with Hanukkah.
Yeah,
like,
it literally should be like coming out this Friday. Like
yeah,
literally Hanukkah starts next like Monday. So
it's a good Hanukkah movie.
Yes, there aren't very many. So,
no,
that I know of. So. I actually appreciated those early scenes, when they're driving through and ask him what he wants for Christmas. And he says Christmas, or for Hanukkah, and he says Christmas lights.
Yeah,
and the dad's like, Jews don't have Christmas lights. I thought, but the way his dad, like, because Bert is always actually somewhat of an optimist in many ways, weirdly. But we have 8 candles, right?
Yeah,
and so
8
he's
candles
like,
burning in the window. Yeah,
exactly. So I think those are nice touches, and I really appreciate Paul Dano's performance in this film. I think he's very good.
Well, the movie
but it's not as flashy though, right? So
no, it's not his Riddler.
Oh.
No, but it's not big Paul Dano.
Exactly.
It's actually quite internalized and subtle Paul Dano, which is a very good performer.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny, with the like comparing the Armageddon Time again. It's another movie that often talks about the Jewishness of the characters and makes it an explicit part, and that's in the 1980s. So it's a slightly different environment where there's not an implied anti-Semitism in the people around, but it's the idea that the Jewish people within that film are starting to kind of pass for white to the point where they, even though they tell themselves stories about the Holocaust at home during dinner and about their differences, they like to take advantage of the fact that for all intents and purposes, nobody cares in some respects. And like, that's a part of it. And this movie doesn't have that, but they do kind of feed into the Jewish American experience is very key to both these films. And I like that specificity, especially as it plays into movies. But you see that beginning to happen
when they go also in the camping trip.
Yeah.
And Bert wants to sing that song.
Yeah.
And then Benny makes it a big joke.
The
right?
Yiddish, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Seth Rogen's quite good here. He's used well for being, he's not going outside of his like Seth Rogen zone of performance, but he's used really well for the story.
Exactly. I feel like he got the role in this because of the pickle movie that he made. In a sense, that his ability to like also like do both comedic and treat like the family dynamic stuff.
No, you know why I think he got it is because his chemistry with Michelle Williams from Sarah Polley's Take This Waltz.
From Take This Waltz. You're right. Good point.
They play a married couple in it.
Yeah.
So they know each other and they're comfortable with each other and they have an easygoing nature, which she does not have with Paul Dano.
No.
You think whatever bad things you want about me, kiddo, but you stop making movies, it'll break your mother's heart. You will break her heart, I mean it. She doesn't deserve that, not from anybody, least of all from you.
And what about the ending? The ending scene of this film is like on its own.
Okay,
right?
no, I love the ending so much.
Too good. But what the best is that the visual joke at the very last scene,
where the camera actually
shifts up,
so that it's because if the horizon at the top, it's at the bottom, it's interesting, but at the middle, it's boring.
David Lynch.
But it's okay. There is a meta joke in there though, like. It's just the presentation of the scene, the fact that we see Sammy not sneak out, but he goes to see Liberty Valance earlier in the film.
Yep, exactly.
We watch clips from
and then
Liberty
when they
Valance,
look at all the posters, and that's the last one that he
that
sees.
shot of there's a 360-degree pan
of all the John Ford films,
and it ends with him realizing that the poster just to his left, where his head is obscuring a bit, when he leans back and looks at it in the frame, he sees that it's the man who shot Liberty Valance, which I think Spielberg considers like
The best
possibly the
Ford?
greatest movie ever made. At least one.
I'm due for a rewatch. I've been toying with the idea of next year, like trying to watch every John Ford I can find.
There's
but
hundreds.
There's so many. Maybe I have to skip the silent films.
Yeah, that it'd probably be doable if you didn't do the silent and did the silent as its own thing at a different time.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a lot of lost John Ford movies, unfortunately, too. But it's just so that in and of itself is amazing. And it was funny because I went to see it at the Varsity in Toronto, and there's, it's the movie theater known for having like a lot of old folks go to see movies there.
Yeah.
And it was a matinee. And so as it was panning very slowly and lovingly over these classic movie posters, this old couple behind me were like, "Oh, that movie's wonderful. Oh, how green," and it's How Green Was My Valley.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, it's a wonderful film." And then Three Godfathers. "Oh, The Godfather, that's fun." And like they're just like speaking out the meaning of these specific John Ford movies, and everyone. And then Liberty Valance, and they're like, "Oh, yes, of course."
It's kind of interesting that Spielberg sort of like puts Ford up here. Like by all accounts, he did meet John Ford briefly when he was young, and but it's interesting that he makes kind of John Ford the stand-in for like the classic movies, the classic Hollywood in that sense, and considers him like the greatest in that sense. The same way that actually it was Orson Welles also felt the same way about Ford.
Remember, he watched Stagecoach.
Exactly. That's the famous line, right? Where he says, they asked, it's like, who did you study before you made Citizen Kane? He's like, well, I watched John Ford. It's particularly Stagecoach, yeah.
It's actually interesting that generation of the 1940s filmmakers thought of the 1930s filmmakers in that way. So Billy Wilder had a plaque in his office on the wall that said, "What would Lubitsch do?" And it explains Billy Wilder as a filmmaker. Really, It's like Lubitsch is his godfather. He's going to do what he does. And in many ways, Spielberg does look to Ford in the idea of the pinnacle of classical popular.
The interesting thing is that Ford would continue to make great films up until even some people consider The Searchers his greatest film. That's in the 50s. So
yeah, it's true. But what I was gonna say a few minutes ago is basically it's the meta joke where it's like, you're going to meet the world's greatest filmmaker, and then it's David Lynch sitting in there.
Exactly.
And it's like...
And the long like, smoke, sliding the cigar.
Oh, it's so good. But it's so funny where it's like, Spielberg is making a joke that it's Lynch, but it's also like, I could see Steven Spielberg be like, "Oh, David Lynch is the best filmmaker in the world." Because he's the kind of guy who respects film that much.
And that Lynch would do the role too. It was fun.
Apparently Lynch was adamant on doing it in character and trying to sublimate himself. So you can tell his voice is not quite as Lynch as usual.
And he visually gets the hat and the patch and the glasses looks pretty good.
It is. It worked. It's such a nice touch at the end.
It is. Yeah.
You can tell that also in Sammy the combination of awe and terror.
But that's apparently accurate. I mean, we could go on the stories I've read about John Ford, when
he walks in with all the lipstick.
Yeah. Well, I read so he was a man of many mixed things. Apparently he was obviously a heavy drinker. He would go on these crazy benders and be under a blanket and stuff like that. But there's a famous he had this persona to hold up. There's one, I don't know if you've ever heard the story, and we can cut this if it goes too long. But the Ford, there was a guy who had worked with him years before who came up to him and was basically, "Mr. Ford, my wife, she's very sick, and I don't have any money, and can you help me out? Can you help me out, Mr. Ford?" And he's like, "Get out of here!" And he shoves the guy out of the way, and all this stuff goes into his car, and then he turns to his assistant, and is like, "Go find him and give him the money."
Yeah, no, I remember that story. Yeah.
So that Ford was both he wanted this persona of the tough, wartime guy, a tough old Irishman, but he was deep down actually a very sentimental person, which I think his films show as well.
Yes.
Yeah. No, so now we got Spielberg bookends his career with this. I mean, obviously, I think Spielberg is going to continue to make some more movies.
But if this was the last Spielberg movie, would that be kind of fitting, that ending? Especially because this is what I think about it. The final shot where the actual camera adjusts to follow the advice of John Ford in the film. It's maybe the only moment in all of Spielberg cinema where he inserts himself as the filmmaker behind the camera into
it's almost
the shot.
Like Looney Tunes. It's
yes.
like Duck Amuck, where it makes it also very clear that the guy making this movie is Sammy, right? At that point, even if you didn't follow all the buzz about the movie, didn't know much about it, you'd be like, oh, director is following the advice that he got.
He took it to heart.
Sammy, We're going to use Daddy's camera to film it. Only crash the train once, okay? Then after we get the film developed, you can watch it crash over and over till it's not so scary anymore. And your real train won't ever get broken. One more thing, Dolly. Let's not tell your father. It'll be our secret movie, just yours and mine. Okay?
Okay.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.